But turning to the Middle East now, Mr. Speaker, for more than 10 weeks, Israeli forces have blocked food, water and medicine getting into Gaza. There is now a humanitarian catastrophe with 2 million people at risk of famine and 1 in 5 facing starvation. Rather than ending this crisis, the Netanyahu government is planning to seize all Gaza indefinitely. Now, I know the Prime Minister will agree that the blockade to Gaza should end, and I'm sure he would agree that it would be appalling if Netanyahu proceeds with that escalation. But will he act now and pick up the phone to President Trump for a joint plan to recognise Palestine and get food, water and medicine into Gaza?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising this because the situation in Gaza is simply intolerable and getting worse. And we are working with other leaders urgently to bring about rapid and unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza, which is desperately needed, obviously alongside the release of hostages, and to get back to a ceasefire, and that work is going on through my team 24/7. I do believe that is the initial action that needs to be taken, but I still fundamentally believe that however remote it may seem at the moment, the pathway to a two-state solution is the only way for settled and lasting peace in the Middle East, and we will continue with our allies to pursue that path.
To ask the Secretary of State for FCDO if he will make a statement on the UK's assessment of the likelihood of genocide in Gaza.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, alongside partners, the UK convened a meeting of the UN Security Council in response to the intolerable civilian suffering and humanitarian need in Gaza. As I told this House yesterday, Israel's denial of aid is appalling. Tons of food are currently sitting, rotting, at the Gaza-Israel border, blocked from reaching people who are starving. Israeli ministers have said Israel's decision to block this aid is a pressure lever. This is cruel and it is indefensible. Overnight, yet more Palestinians have been killed in Israeli strikes. This must end. The message yesterday was clear. The world demands Israel stop and change course immediately. With our allies, we are telling the government of Israel, lift the block on aid entering Gaza now. Enable the UN and all humanitarians to save lives now. We need an immediate ceasefire now. Humanitarian aid must never be used as a political tool or military tactic, and the UK will not support any aid mechanism that seeks to deliver political or military objectives or puts vulnerable civilians at risk. The International Court of Justice case on genocide is ongoing, Mr. Speaker. We support the ICJ. We support its independence. The ICJ issued a set of provisional measures in this case, and we support those measures. Israel has an obligation to implement them. It is the UK government's long-standing position that any formal determination as to whether genocide has occurred is a matter for a competent court and not for governments or non-judicial bodies. The UK is fully committed to upholding our responsibilities under domestic and international law, and we have at all times acted in a manner consistent with our legal obligations, including under the Genocide Convention. The devastation from this conflict must end, Mr. Speaker. Our complete focus is on lifting Israeli restrictions on aid, on freeing the hostages, on protecting civilians, and on restoring the ceasefire. We will work urgently with our allies and partners on further pressure to make Israel change course.
Mr. Speaker, overnight, the UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator Tom Fletcher warned that a genocide was possible in Gaza. 1 in 5 people faces starvation. The entire population is facing high levels of acute food insecurity. In Gaza, Gaza North, Deir al-Balah, Khan Yunis and Rafah, there is a risk of famine. And there's one primary cause: Israel's aid blockade since the 2nd of March. The Security Council were told that civilians in Gaza have again been forcibly displaced and confined into ever-shrinking spaces, with 80% of the territory either within Israeli militarised zones or under displacement orders. Israeli airstrikes on the European hospital in Gaza yesterday killed 28 people, with further reports of at least 48 deaths overnight from strikes elsewhere. So can he tell us whether the FCDO has conducted any recent assessment of its own on the risk that the Israeli authorities are committing genocide? Last night, the UK's ambassador to the UN rightly called on Israel to lift the restrictions and ensure a return to delivery of aid in Gaza in line with humanitarian principles and international law. But this is not enough. Notwithstanding the government's position that it's for judicial bodies to make a determination, what is the minister's response to the latest UN assessment that genocide is possible in Gaza? Can he confirm whether the UK stands by the obligation to prevent duty in the Genocide Convention? Parliament needs to know whether the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator's assessment will lead to a shift in the UK government's position. Why is it that when the horrors increase, the UK government's position stays the same? And lastly, to echo the words in Tom Fletcher's briefing, will you act decisively to prevent genocide and ensure respect for international humanitarian law, or will you instead repeat the empty words, "We did all we could"?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for asking these important questions. The testimony of the Emergency Relief Coordinator, the very most senior official in the entire humanitarian system in the world, last night at the UN Security Council meeting that we called with our allies, is clearly incredibly important. And I can confirm to the honourable member that we do abide by our international law obligations, including to the Genocide Convention, and we consider in all of our IHL assessments, which are ongoing, all of the relevant tests, and we will continue to do so. The honourable gentleman, Mr. Speaker, asks important questions, questions which have echoed in this chamber yesterday and throughout this long and painful conflict. This government has taken steps, whether it's restoring funding, suspending arms exports, working with our partners in the UN and elsewhere, but clearly we are in a situation today where nobody in this House would wish to be, nobody on these benches, and I'm sure nobody on the benches opposite. We will need to take more and more action until we see the change that we need, but the central question, as I've told this House repeatedly, the central question is that aid is not being allowed into Gaza. While it is not allowed into Gaza, there is nothing that can be done to get the aid at the scale and in the manner necessary to save Palestinian life. And it is on that point that we call the Security Council, and on that point we will continue to act.